It's time for Myth of the Week.
All right, so awesome. So this was a really funny one that we run into every now and then. And this picture, this isn't just necessarily a picture of a violation. If you were to go ahead and sleeve some seal tight on this and run, say, in the back of that enclosure, there's really nothing that says you can't do that. Short sections of raceway are permitted to do this. In all actuality, I have ran into you basically a lot of times what the inspectors want you to do is they want you to complete the raceway, both ends. They want to inspect it for rough inspection, and then you pull your conductors, make it up, then they come back and check it for a final inspection. So usually the inspectors want this as a two-part installation rather than this. And there was a lot of awesome comments that I saw that I really enjoyed this week, where they were like, "Oh, well, where's the inspector? How's the inspector going to find out?" And different kinds of things where it's like, yeah, nobody's really going to know. And I think that they just did this almost in the code as like a continuity thing to kind of just make sure that you're kind of doing things in a step-by-step order. There was one that I saw, one of the Facebook groups that I saw, where they had pulled their conductors. They were getting ready to set the panel, but they had to let them pour the slab first. So they had all their conductors coiled up and everything. Well, they went and poured the slab. They had it all coiled up, sitting up on top of the thing. Well, then they left. Everyone left, and the coil of cable, or the coil of conductors, went and fell down and fell in the concrete, in the wet concrete, and actually basically by the time they came back in the morning was dried in the concrete in the morning. So that's the kind of thing where I kind of get this from, and they were trying to get a liability of who was going to pay for it, and they ended up finding out that it was a code violation. They should have actually mounted the panel and then pulled the conductors into that panel. Then they wouldn't have fell into the concrete and been buried in the concrete. So, right. That's kind of the real world where I see it from this standpoint.
All right. Well, I'm going to show you a couple of sections here where I agree with what this says. When you go, since you based it on 2020, I went to 2020 NEC, and the first thing I looked at was 300.10, where it talks about the electrical continuity of the metal raceways and enclosures. And it basically just tells you that they have to be metallically joined together in a continuous electrical conductor. Now, it's funny because the way they're sort of reading that, they're talking about the metal raceways, cable armor, or other metal closures for conductors. And then it says joined together in a continuous electrical conductor. So to me, that's telling me everything has to be, the raceway system has to be complete. And as you said, you had exception 1 there that talked about the short sections of raceway. That's an exception to that rule. And then there's another one where the equipment is isolated, and it'll tell you 250.96B. And basically what that is where they go in and put a non-metallic spacer between it for electromagnetic interference. And then when you go and look at it, 300.11A tells you all your raceways, your cable assembly boxes, cabinets, fittings, they have to be securely fastened in place also. And that goes back to what you were talking about, where the conductors fell out into that concrete. Now, I also went and looked at 300.12, and it's the same thing when you're looking at mechanical continuity for the raceways and cables. And it says it has to be continuous between the cabinets, boxes, fittings, or other enclosures. And looky there, they have another one, exception 1, mentioned in them short sections of raceway again. See that? And then 300.13A goes the same thing and talks about conductors and raceways shall be what? Continuous between all of that. So that's tying all that in just one section after another. And then if you go look at 300.18A, that sort of finishes it up, and you got the exception there again for the short sections of raceway. It basically just tells you it has to be a complete run. Now, I did think about this a little bit where sometimes there's a leeway depending on the type of job and everything that's being done. And I wanted people to look at here, looking at 90.4, and I wanted to mainly look at the second paragraph, and it says, by special permission, the authority having
Right.
jurisdiction may waive specific requirements in the code or permit alternate methods where it is assured that equivalent objectives can be achieved by establishing and maintaining effective safety. So
Yeah.
I look at that, and I look at that as far as safety, because you're also looking at that where you're not going to damage the conductors, because that will, if you damage those conductors, all of a sudden you're not providing effective safety at that point, because those conductors, if you didn't see them getting pinched or something like that, or you had something that dug in the installation, now you've got a problem there. So they can take and waive specific requirements or permit an alternative method, but there needs to be a reason before you do that. Otherwise, I sort of feel that everything has to be maintained as a complete raceway system, everything mechanically secured, and it's all that includes the raceway and the conductors.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because there was a lot of comments of people mentioning like, "Hey, how's the inspector going to know about it?" Well,
Mhm.
a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these inspectors went through this trade the same way we did, and I'm not saying a lot, but like actually here in Colorado, it's actually a requirement um, to be an electrical inspector in the state of Colorado. You have to go through a 4-year apprenticeship. You have to pass the Colorado Journeyman's exam, and that's the only path you can go to be an inspector here in Colorado. So to me, I like that. I think that's good because then I can have a courtesy call, have the inspector come in and say, you know what, this is what I have. I have a 54-week lead time on my gear. The customer wants this job done in 42 weeks. What are my options here that we can go ahead and move forward and try to get some of this stuff done? Maybe some alternate methods that, maybe a lot of people wouldn't have thought like outside the box and thought, well, maybe, yeah, you could do that or you could do this or
Right.
whatnot. You could build this whole section of gear, maybe cap it off to a junction box and then get your main gear fired up and, you know what I mean, just isolate that section. And there's different things you can do. And we've had to work through some of these challenges, like working in the gas and oil industry. There's a lot of weird stuff that we have to do that's not normal towards the industry. We've had times before where they're like, all right, there's a top secret building that's getting delivered. We can't tell you what it is. It's some secret process. And they come have this building on a skid, basically come delivered from wherever, probably Texas or somewhere, and actually there was one I thought was really funny. One of the buildings was built in my hometown, Arvada, Colorado. But it was pretty funny. I was like, wow, this whole thing's built and assembled Arvada, Colorado, right down the street from my house.
Mhm.
But and it's coming out to like the Wyoming border. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay. But we have to have these things built. Like we have to have all our wiring just sitting there waiting for these buildings. And then they show up with these buildings, drop them, and then we got to wire them. And if we're sitting there waiting to build raceways and to like tie into the building and to, pull conductors, like a lot of times they're doing like tray cable, because that was one of the comments I really enjoyed that was in there too. Somebody's like, yeah, it's got to be complete even if it's cable tray. Well, how do you complete cable tray when the building's not even there yet? You can't even complete the waterfall into the building. You can't even do anything.
Mhm.
You can't even drill out your stovepipes. You can't do any of that stuff till that building shows up. So a lot of times we try to be as prepared as possible. We know the requirements of what's going to be required for certain things. We know it's going to have, a 4160 volt section. It's going to have a 13.8 section. We know we need, 9 parallel runs to the 13.8 section. We know that, we're going to have a 4160 step down transformer to 480. So We can get those pads set for the transformers. We can get our pipes from the transformers into where the gear is going to go inside the building. We can get all that stuff stubbed up into our windows and, basically get as much done as possible. So when that building shows up, they drop that sucker and we just start drilling it. We just start Swiss cheesing that building, and start, a lot of times we'll have our conductors just sitting there. We'll have our tray cables already pulled. I mean, some of those poles are like half a mile,
Yeah.
and you're coming on 3-story tall tray, from the gate all the way to the, EEC building to your control building. So you have to have all that pulled. And are you telling me that you're going to sit there and wait for that building to get built before you start pulling tray cable? I mean, you'll just get destroyed. So a lot of that stuff we have to take with a grain of salt. And out in the gas and oil, usually the head engineer on site is the AHJ, basically. So he's basically granting us special permission to do whatever we want under his supervision, under engineering supervision. So, like I say, a lot of that stuff it's put into perspective by me. That's kind of why I like doing these myth of the weeks, kind of, because a lot of people just only think through the glasses of the residential guy, or only look through the glasses of the commercial guy, or whatever. There's some people out there that watch this show that aren't even electricians. And so we try to bring that whole common thing together to where they all kind of understand, like, hey, you just got to do what you got to do,
Sure.
So,
It's no different. I mean, how many times do you see that they have whips that are up above a ceiling waiting to install light fixtures, or maybe you got a whip out there for an AC unit or something? I mean, there are things that you work with authority having jurisdiction. They understand that it's not going to be damaged, and it's fine. And like an installation you were just talking about, engineering's out there. They know what's going on. They want to get set up for it. It's an alternate method that they're allowing because they need to get prepped for it. I mean, and that's why I brought up 90.4, because there are things you look at that you don't have to be complete all the way through. But I believe if you're going, you got cabinet there and everything, you need to complete the raceway system. So
yeah, and it's gonna help you in the long run. And I think that was a really good point that you made with 90.4, because what I've found in the past is you're way better off having the inspector on your side than trying to fight the inspector. I've seen times where guys are like, I'm going to fight the inspector on this one. I'm like, why? The inspector's just trying to do his job. And I've had times before where inspectors are like, they're telling me, oh, this inspector, he always wants a bunch of weird stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have him show me in the code where it's at. And, one of them was this Denver inspector, and he always wanted a ceiling wire going to the can light. And I was just like, the thing that I always found weird was there's no little place for the ceiling wire to go on a can light. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of not really doing it right, because we're just tying this ceiling wire off to the arm of the, can, because that's the only place you can put a ceiling wire at or whatever. It's not really doing anything. And I just says, you know what? I says, why don't these recessed can manufacturers make a place where you could put the ceiling wire if they really want a ceiling wire going to them? He says, yeah, that's a really good point. And he says, well, what would you look up if you wanted to, do this? We've already covered this myth too. But I was like, well, go look in 41036B, and it says it just has to be attached to the ceiling grid. It doesn't say anything about a ceiling wire needing to be there. He says, you know what? He's like, you're the first person that's really challenged me on it, and he got me to think about it. And he's like, don't even worry about it, And so it meant a lot to me that, when you're just asking questions, you're not being confrontational. You're not calling them out or being mean or anything. You're just like, hey, just show me where it is in the code. Just show me where it says that's even a good idea, because literally that's just a wire sitting there doing nothing on a recessed fixture. But,
right.
Like I say, if that was defined as a junction box in 314, then it need a ceiling, it need to comply with 311. So it is what it is. It all fits together, and we're just trying to piece it all together for you guys. But I really appreciate James. That was freaking awesome putting those slides together. And really made sense. Everything just fits together. So
Yeah,
myth is confirmed. It needs to be a complete raceway before you pull conductors.
Yeah, that's why I said there's a lot of sections there. You just read them, go right down in order. Mainly everything's in Article 300, and then just tie 90.4. Hell, you're good to go.
Yeah.
So, all right,
Right
you ready
on.
for the topic?